Harper O'Neill didn't expect the man who sat across from her at the crowded café table to look like he just stepped out of a luxury magazine, and definitely not like he belonged in a place with chipped mugs and sticky floors. "Sorry, there were no other tables," the man said, sliding into the seat opposite her without asking. She blinked, her spoon halfway to her mouth, cereal soggy in almond milk. Sure. Go ahead." He sat like he owned the place, one hand resting lightly on the table, the other tugging at his navy coat sleeve to check his watch. His hair was too perfect, his jaw too sharp, and the leather strap on his wristwatch looked suspiciously like real crocodile. Harper glanced around the cafe. Every table was full, of course. "I'm Harper," she offered, because silence was awkward and he was staring at his phone like it had personally offended him, his eyes lifted. They were a ridiculous shade of steel blue. "Xavier Knox. Cool name," she said, crunching her cereal. "You always borrow tables from strangers, only when I'm desperate or late." "To what? A meeting?" "I own the building next door," he said offhandedly, like he was telling her he owned a decent pair of socks. Harper coughed. "Sorry, own the building," he nodded. "Yeah, I'm redoing the offices. The cafe's part of it too. Lease expires in 7 months," she stared. "So you're what, the landlord?" Something like that. He didn't elaborate, she didn't ask. But something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he didn't bother bragging, was distracting. She stuffed another spoonful into her mouth and tried not to care that her coat had a hole in the sleeve while he probably had a driver waiting outside. Xavier glanced up again. "You work around here, sort of. I'm a freelance illustrator." "Freelance?" One brow rose. "So you draw for a living?" "I draw, I starve, and I chase invoices. It's the dream," he chuckled. "That's honest," Harper shrugged. "Honesty's free." "Unlike rent." "I could," he paused, then shook his head. "Never mind." "What?" He hesitated. "It's nothing, just I'm actually looking for someone to do a mural in the lobby of the new building. Something bold, not corporate. You interested?" Harper narrowed her eyes. "You don't even know if I'm good." He slid her sketchbook across the table. She hadn't realized he'd been peeking. "I do now," he said, her cheeks warmed. "That's a weird move. You steal tables and sketchbooks," he grinned. "Only when I'm desperate." Or intrigued. 2 days later, she stood in the marble lobby of a half-renovated office complex, holding her breath. "This is insane," Harper whispered, staring at the high wall waiting for her brush. "Why are you trusting me with this?" Xavier stood beside her, arms crossed over a crisp white shirt. "Because you're not like the others." "What others?" "The ones who pretend to be something they're not." She glanced at him. "And what do people pretend you are?" "Cold, ruthless." "Bored? Are you?" He looked over at her, and for a second something in his gaze softened. "Not today." The days blurred after that, mornings in the cafe where he always joined her without asking. Afternoons at the building where she painted while he paced through meetings on his phone. Evenings where he stayed long after he needed to, watching her sketch outlines on the scaffolding, sometimes handing her coffee, sometimes just watching in silence. "You don't talk much," she said one night, climbing down the ladder. "You talk enough for both of us." "That's not very romantic." "I'm not trying to be romantic," she paused. "Should you be?" He looked at her then, long and hard. "If I was, would you run?" Harper's heart kicked. "Depends." "Do you always fall for your muralists?" "Only the ones who steal my table." Their first kiss wasn't planned, it was raining. She was soaked. He'd driven her home after she twisted her ankle jumping off the last step in the building. She was laughing, hair stuck to her face, and he just kissed her, no warning. No hesitation, just his mouth on hers, warm and sure and full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Xavier," she whispered when they pulled apart. He rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. By week 3, she was painting less and falling more. He picked her up in cars that cost more than her college degree, took her to restaurants where they gave her a chair for her purse. He bought her a leather sketchbook from Italy and filled the first page himself with a clumsy drawing of a stick figure and a top hat. "For inspiration," he said. She laughed until she cried. But it wasn't the dinners or the gifts that undid her. It was the way he looked at her across the table like she was a secret he hadn't expected to find. It was the way he listened, really listened, when she talked about her father's old painting studio or how she missed the smell of turpentine. It was how he touched her like she mattered. And maybe that's why it hurt so much when she overheard the woman in the café. "I saw Xavier with that artist girl again," she whispered to her friend. "Probably just another fling, he'll get bored, he always does." Harper froze. She didn't say anything to Xavier that night when he drove her home, but when he leaned in to kiss her, she turned her face. He pulled back. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied, and it was the first time she'd ever lied to him. "You didn't answer," Xavier said, voice low, eyes fixed on her front door though his hands stayed resting on the steering wheel. Something shifted. Harper's fingers curled around the strap of her bag. "I'm fine. The way you flinched just now, the way you're not looking at me." "That's not fine." "I'm tired, Xavier, that's all. You don't get quiet when you're tired, you get sarcastic." She turned toward him. "You've known me, what, 3 weeks? You don't get to act like you know everything about me." "I know enough to tell when you're hurt," she exhaled sharply, pulling the door handle. "Good night." Harper, she didn't let him finish. The door shut with a dull thud behind her and she didn't look back. Upstairs, her apartment greeted her with peeling wallpaper and the faint scent of oil paint. She dropped her bag near the couch and stood at the window, watching his car stay parked for a minute longer before it finally pulled away. The rational part of her knew she was being dramatic. But the words she'd overheard had burrowed deep, and now they echoed with everything he hadn't said. He hadn't promised anything, hadn't asked her what this was between them. Just gifts, glances, and touches that felt too good to last, and maybe he hadn't meant to offer more than that. The next morning, she didn't go to the café. Instead, she brewed weak coffee at home and tried to work on a commission for a children's book cover, but her lines came out stiff, and the colors bled in all the wrong places. Her phone buzzed twice. She didn't check it. By afternoon, she caved and went to the building. She told herself it was because she needed to finish the mural, not because she hoped he might be there. When she stepped inside, the echo of her footsteps filled the marble space. Empty. Even his assistant wasn't at the front desk. She climbed the scaffolding and began painting, brush strokes mechanical, her mind elsewhere. "Did I do something I don't know about?" Xavier's voice floated up from below. She didn't look down. "You own the place. You can fire me if you want." "Is that what you think I'm here for? You didn't exactly come to say hi." His footsteps echoed as he walked to the base of the scaffolding. "You disappeared. I wanted to give you space." She dabbed at the wall with a sponge, focusing on a blur of orange and red. "I didn't ask for space. You didn't have to, the silence said it for you." She finally looked down. "I overheard someone," his jaw tensed. "Who? It doesn't matter. What matters is what she said, that this is a pattern for you. That I'm just some temporary thing." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I've dated, that's not a secret, but I've never done this." "Done what?" "Let someone get under my skin so fast I can't breathe without replaying everything they said." "Bought a sketchbook because it reminded me of someone's laugh. Waited outside their apartment because I couldn't stand the thought of them being upset with me." She stared. "I don't do temporary, Harper. I don't even do casual. I do control, plans, contracts. You're the only thing that's ever made me want to throw all of that out the window." She climbed down slowly until they were eye level. "Then why haven't you said anything?" "Because I thought you already knew." "I'm not a mind reader," he exhaled. "Then let me be clear, I want this. You and me." "No expiration date." Her eyes searched his. "You sure?" "I'm terrified, but yes." She didn't move for a moment, then she leaned in and kissed him, soft and unhurried. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I want it too." That night, he took her to a rooftop she didn't know existed above a 5-star hotel with a view that stretched across the entire city. There was no one else there, just a table set for two under a canopy of string lights. "You did this?" she asked, breathless. "I needed you to know I'm serious." She ran her fingers across the linen napkin, then looked up at him. "This doesn't feel like your first time doing something like this." It is, I usually just send flowers, she laughed. You skipped a few steps. This is practically a proposal. Don't tempt me. Her heart jumped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, not a ring, but a silver pendant shaped like a paintbrush. For luck, he said. And because I couldn't stop thinking about how you said your dad used to wear one around his neck, her breath caught. How did you know? You mentioned it. Once, I remembered. She reached for the pendant with shaking hands. You listened too well. It's dangerous. I don't want to miss anything, he said. Later, as they danced to music only he could afford to have piped through the rooftop sound system, she rested her head against his chest and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run before someone walked away first. But across the city, in a sleek office tower filled with glass and secrets, a man in a charcoal suit stared at a photo on his desk. Harper, laughing in front of her mural. He tapped the edge of the frame twice, then picked up the phone. I found her, he said, and she's with Xavier Knox. The voice on the other end went cold. Then it's time. Xavier stood on the edge of the rooftop garden of his penthouse, the city lights flickering below like scattered embers. His phone call had ended 20 minutes ago, but the weight of it still pressed against his chest like a stone. He hadn't expected that name to come up again, Damien Voss. And he definitely hadn't expected Damien to know Harper. He ran a hand through his hair and stared out across the skyline. The timing was too perfect, too precise. Harper appearing out of nowhere, her talent undeniable, her charm disarming, and now Damien calling out of the shadows, specifically naming her. It couldn't be coincidence. Xavier, he turned. Harper stood barefoot by the open terrace door, one hand tucked around a mug of tea, the other brushing her hair behind her ear. She wore one of his shirts. He hadn't seen her grab it, but it fit like it belonged to her. He softened. Couldn't sleep. Neither could you, she said, walking toward him. You're radiating tension. He took the mug from her hand and set it on the ledge. Something came up at work. Complicated. She tilted her head. Complicated like spreadsheets, or complicated like someone's threatening to ruin your life? He studied her. You always ask questions like that, only when you look like you're about to jump off your own balcony. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her waist. You're not what I expected. She looked up at him. What did you expect? Someone easier to forget. Her smile faded. Are you trying to forget me? Not even a little. Still, the edge of his mind buzzed with questions. He hadn't asked her about Damien, not yet. He couldn't, not without shattering something delicate between them. But he needed to know what game was being played. The next morning, he instructed his assistant to discreetly run a background check not on Harper, but on her connections. Anyone she might have known before she arrived in the city. If there was a link to Damien, Xavier needed to see it for himself. Meanwhile, Harper painted. The mural was nearly finished, the final colors sweeping across the high lobby wall like a sunrise breaking over steel. She worked with headphones in, humming under her breath, completely unaware that the man watching her from the mezzanine above wasn't just admiring her brushwork, he was scanning every movement for answers. Later that afternoon, she found him in the executive lounge, poring over architectural layouts. You're the only person I know who reviews floor plans like they're poetry, she said, perching on the edge of the table. That's insulting to floor plans, he replied, not looking up. She reached across and flipped the folder shut. Okay, what's going on? There's a merger I didn't see coming, he said carefully. Someone I used to work with. We have unfinished business, her brow furrowed. So talk to them, settle it. It's not that simple. It never is. But that doesn't mean you can't try. Xavier studied her for a long moment. Did you ever know a man named Damien Voss? Her reaction was instant, too quick to be rehearsed. Her limbs stiffened. Where did that name come from? So you do know him. She stood. I did. A long time ago. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't relevant, and because I didn't think it mattered. He rose from his chair. It matters if he's actively trying to interfere with my life, with us. Harper's chest rose and fell. What did he say to you? That you're with me. That he's been watching. She turned away, hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. I knew he'd show up eventually, I just didn't expect him to use you to do it. You need to tell me everything. She faced him, eyes glassy. I used to work for him. Not as an artist, he didn't care about that. I managed branding for one of his startups. He wanted everything to look perfect, no matter what it actually was. I stayed until I realized he was laundering money through the company. I confronted him. He threatened me, so I left. Not quietly. Xavier's voice was low. You exposed him? I gave what I had to a journalist. The story fell apart before it was published. He covered his tracks, but he knew it came from me. I've been laying low ever since. You should have told me from the start. I thought if I told you you'd walk away. He stepped closer. You really believe I'd do that? I don't know, she admitted. I've never had something like this before. I don't know what survives and what doesn't. Xavier's jaw tightened, his hand reaching for hers. We don't survive by hiding, we survive by facing things together. She held onto his fingers like a lifeline. Then tell me what we're up against. He led her to the window, pointing across the skyline. Damien's trying to buy the building across the street. It's not about property, it's about proximity. He wants to remind me he's still a threat. Then let's remind him he's not. Harper, this isn't a game. He doesn't just want to rattle me, he wants to dismantle everything I've built. Then let me help. He stared at her. What are you offering? She lifted her chin. My name still means something to him. If I walk back into his world pretending I've had second thoughts, no. It's the only way to find out what he's planning. I won't let you risk yourself like that. You don't get to decide that, he exhaled slowly. If we do this, we do it carefully. No improvising, no solo missions. Then say it. Say what? That you trust me. He cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheek. I trust you more than anyone. She leaned into his touch. Then let's finish what I started years ago. As they stood there, the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting shadows across the glass and steel of the world they were about to enter together. Neither of them noticed the camera lens glinting from the rooftop across the street. Or the man behind it, watching them through mirrored sunglasses, already preparing his next move. Harper stepped through the revolving glass doors of the private club like she belonged there, even though everything about the place reeked of curated exclusivity. The staff didn't blink as she passed. Xavier had her name placed on the guest list hours ago, under the guise of an Arts Foundation rep. Inside, the air was thick with money and intention. She spotted Damien before he saw her. He stood near the piano, surrounded by men in pressed suits and women who laughed just slightly too loud. He hadn't changed, still dressed like wealth was a weapon, his tie sharp, his expression unreadable. She moved toward him with purpose. Harper O'Neill, he said, turning as if he'd sensed her approach by scent. Now there's a surprise. You always did enjoy theatrics, she replied, keeping her voice even. He studied her for a long moment, eyes narrowing like she was a puzzle he hadn't finished solving. Last I heard, you vanished. I assumed you'd grown tired of throwing stones at a fortress. Maybe I've realized some fortresses are hollow. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. So what brings you back to the world of polished floors and polished lies? I've been painting, she said, glancing around the room, but I miss feeling useful. Thought I'd see what opportunities still existed in your orbit. Damien's gaze darkened slightly, as if he'd expected her to beg, not bait. I suppose time softens even the most righteous. It sharpens, actually, she corrected. But I've learned to choose my moments. He motioned toward the back hallway. Let's talk somewhere quieter. She followed, every step calculated, every breath measured. Xavier had insisted on a wire. She wore it beneath her blouse, and somewhere across the street, he was listening. Damien led her into a private room lined with velvet chairs and a single chandelier that flickered like it had secrets of its own. Let's skip the preamble, he said, pouring himself a drink. You knew I was circling Knox's building. You knew I'd find out you were with him. I didn't hide it. That isn't the same as admitting it. I didn't owe you the courtesy. He sipped his drink, then set the glass down. So why now? What do you want? I want protection. If you're planning something big, I'd rather be on the inside than buried beneath it. Damien leaned back, one arm draped over the chair. And what makes you think I'd trust you? You nearly ruined me once. I've changed, she said, forcing a note of indifference into her voice. And I know Xavier better than anyone. You want leverage? I can give it to you. He studied her, and she could tell he didn't fully believe her, but doubt was all she needed to plant. He'd want to test her. That was the plan. I'll consider it, he said finally. But if you cross me again, there won't be a second warning. As she left the club, her hands were ice cold, but her spine stayed straight until she was safely inside the car waiting outside. The moment the door shut behind her, Xavier pulled her into his arms. You shouldn't have gone in alone. I wasn't alone, you were listening. I couldn't see you. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. He bought it, or at least he wants to. Xavier didn't speak right away. Then he's going to test you. You know that, I know. And if he lays one hand on you, he won't, she cut in, because I won't let him. The next few days passed in a blur of shadows and strategy. Damien sent word through one of his people, a woman named Calla, who had eyes like smoke and a voice trained in manipulation. Harper was instructed to attend a gallery auction where she'd be introduced to a buyer who was supposedly laundering money through art sales. It was a trap, and they both knew it. Xavier arranged the counterplay. The gallery owner was an old contact, discreet and loyal. By the time Harper arrived at the event, the room was already laced with silent eyes, his network watching every movement. She wore a sleek black jumpsuit, no jewelry, her hair swept back. Damien's buyer, a man with two perfect teeth and a too casual lean, greeted her with a drink and a rehearsed smile. "You're Harper O'Neill," he said. "Damien speaks highly of you." He must be feeling generous. They exchanged pleasantries, danced around the topic of high-value transfers, and Harper dropped the cues Xavier had coached her to use, phrases that would later tie the man directly to the shell companies Damien had planted across 3 continents. The next morning, Harper met Xavier on the rooftop of his penthouse. He was already waiting, dressed in a dark coat, eyes fixed on the skyline like he could see the future unraveling. "It's done," she said. "I know," he replied, holding up a file. "His buyer is in custody." "He's trying to cut a deal already," her breath caught. "That fast? We had everything ready. You gave us the last piece." She walked toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What happens to Damien? He's already gone to ground, but he won't recover from this. His empire's cracked wide open, and we have enough to make sure it stays that way." Harper leaned back to look up at him. "So that's it, we win." Xavier brushed a hand across her cheek. "We win." She stood on her toes and kissed him long and deep, the kind of kiss that didn't ask questions or apologize for battle scars. When they broke apart, he pulled something from his coat pocket. A velvet box, her breath hitched. "I'm not asking yet," he said, "but I will, one day. When it's quiet, when we're not looking over our shoulders." She opened the box. Inside sat a ring, not flashy, not oversized, just a single sapphire, deep blue and steady. "Why this stone?" she asked softly. He smiled for the first time in days. "Because that's what color your eyes look like when you're about to fight for something you believe in." She didn't cry, though something inside her wanted to. Instead, she took the box and closed it gently. "I'll wear it when you ask, and when I do, you'd better be ready for forever." Later that evening, they returned to the café where it all began. The same table, the same chipped mugs. But now she wore his coat draped over her shoulders, and he didn't need to pretend he belonged there. The waitress handed them menus, but neither looked. "Still think stealing a table was a good move?" she asked. Xavier reached across the table, lacing their fingers together. "It was the best decision I've ever made." The first time Xavier brought Harper to his vineyard estate in the south of France, she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her suitcase. "You have an actual vineyard," she said, standing at the edge of the private tarmac, staring at the sleek black helicopter waiting to take them inland. "Is this your version of a weekend getaway?" I figured you could use a change of scenery, he said, adjusting his sunglasses. And I needed to show you where I disappear to when I want the world to shut up. The estate was tucked away behind rows of olive trees and lavender fields, a stone shadow perched on a hill that looked like it belonged in an oil painting. Harper wandered through the house barefoot, trailed by sunlight and the scent of citrus from the open windows. This place doesn't feel like the city, she said later, as they walked the rows between the vines, their fingers brushing with every step. That's the point. Here, nobody cares about power plays or acquisitions. It's just rain, soil, and patience. Do you ever come here alone? I used to, not anymore. They stayed a week. She painted on the balcony each morning while he took calls from a sunlit study that overlooked the hills. In the evenings, they cooked together in the rustic kitchen, Xavier surprisingly good with a knife, Harper better at balancing flavors than either of them had expected. One night, as the wind rustled through the tall grass outside and the fireplace crackled behind them, he handed her a glass of wine and sat at her feet. "You haven't asked what happened to the mural," he said. "I figured if something went wrong, I'd have heard. It's finished." "The unveiling's set for next Friday. Press, investors, the whole thing, they're calling it the centerpiece of the renovation." She raised an eyebrow. "And you're cool with hundreds of people staring at my work and not yours. I'm counting on it." "Why?" He leaned back to look at her. "Because you made that building beautiful in a way I never could, and I want them all to see what I see when I look at you." Her throat tightened. "You're really not afraid of feelings anymore, are you?" "I'm still terrified. But I've accepted the fact that you're worth the fear." The night before the unveiling, they returned to the city. Harper stood in front of her closet, staring at the dress bag that had been hanging there when they arrived, a gift from Xavier's assistant, who'd apparently taken note of her measurements weeks ago. "Is this the part where I get overwhelmed and cry?" she asked, zipping it open to reveal a floor-length gown in deep emerald silk. "No," Xavier said from the doorway. "This is the part where you wear that and make the entire room forget why they came." The unveiling was held in the newly completed lobby. The walls gleamed, the lights casting a soft gold sheen across the marble floors. Harper stood beside Xavier near the entrance, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, as guests flowed in with champagne flutes and curated curiosity. When the cloth covering the mural was pulled down, the room fell silent. The painting stretched across the wall in sweeping, vivid color, an abstract story of resilience, transformation, and wild, unapologetic joy. At the center, a woman leapt from shadow into light, her arms outstretched, her body in motion, her expression fierce and free. Gasps followed. Then applause. Xavier didn't look at the mural, he looked at her. "You did this," he said, gently squeezing her hand. "So did you," she whispered. After the crowd thinned and the press retreated, Xavier led her to the rooftop where the city glowed beneath them. A string quartet played softly in the corner and a table for two sat beneath a canopy of white roses. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice hushed. "I wanted to give you something permanent," he said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "This is the deed to the café." "It's yours now." Her mouth fell open. "You bought it?" "No," he said. "I gave it back. You made it meaningful. I just made sure no one takes it from you again." She threw her arms around him, nearly knocking them both off balance. "You're insane. Only about you." They danced under the stars until her heels came off and her laughter echoed between the buildings. A few weeks later, they returned to the vineyard, this time not as a retreat, but as a beginning. Xavier stood beneath an old oak tree near the vineyard's edge, wearing a charcoal suit and no tie, sunlight scattering through the branches above. Harper walked toward him in a dress the color of morning mist, barefoot, a crown of wildflowers in her hair. There were no guests, no photographers. Just them and the quiet hum of summer. "Harper O'Neill," he said, taking her hands, "you stole my table, you ruined my plans, and you made me believe love doesn't have to be a weakness, it can be a promise. And you," she said, her voice shaking, "taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person." Specifically, the infuriating, relentless, beautiful man standing in front of me. They exchanged vows beneath that tree, their fingers tangled, their hearts steady. And when they kissed, it wasn't just a seal of love, it was a vow of forever. Years passed. Harper's work graced galleries from Paris to Tokyo. Her name became synonymous with color that felt like emotion itself. Xavier stepped back from acquisitions and focused on legacy-building spaces that inspired rather than intimidated. They lived between two worlds: the vineyard, where their daughter learned to walk among the lavender, and the city, where their love first bloomed like a secret. And every year, on the anniversary of the mural's unveiling, they returned to that building, stood before the painting, and remembered. Not just what they'd overcome, but how they had chosen each other again and again with open eyes and fearless hearts.